All right. So hi, my name is Jake. You know this. So my stance. I'm just gonna start this now. My stance is that I'm so nervous. Spanking is an appropriate form of child discipline because when administered properly, out of love, it helps a child in the long run. And a lot of people associate it with child abuse. And I've read lots of articles on it. And at one point, I thought it was. But child abuse is when a parent or guardian hits their child with emotion and they're bringing out their emotions on their child, and it's not out of love and it's not to show them what they're doing is wrong. And spanking, it shouldn't just happen like you do something wrong, you get a spanking. That should not happen ever. It should only happen when a child knows what they're doing is wrong and you've already reiterated once or twice, maybe 3 times, that they shouldn't be doing whatever it is that they're doing. And that's in a nutshell what I believe. So I'm going to pass the mic.
All right. Okay, so I completely agree with you that child abuse is when a parent or guardian hits their child out of emotion. So I'm just going to address your points, then I'm going to present a case. So you said spanking should only happen when the child understands what they're doing is wrong. Taking notes here as I go. And you said that child abuse is when something happens out of emotion. So I'm going to just respond to this because I recognize that this is a very emotional topic. I was spanked as a child. I used to believe in spanking. And for a very long time, I thought that spanking was something that I should thank my parents for doing to me as a child. And what happened with the realization, what happens with the realization for most people to get rid of this mentality that spanking is okay, that spanking is acceptable, is often just something just clicks. And the number one thing that has clicked for me when I have worked with it on myself, worked with it with the people that I know, because it's the topic that I'm very passionate about, has been recognizing that children are people. And so for that reason, what I would like to present is a criterion of whoever in this round most proves that they have the net benefit of the least need to recover from childhood should win this round. Because study after study has consistently proven that spanking, no matter what it's for, even if the parent does it in a loving manner, so-called, or even if they're doing it in a specific way, or they're not using an instrument, they're just using an open hand, none of that matters. And it definitely leads to anxiety, depression. It is ineffective, and all of those things mean that children who have been spanked need to recover from their childhood as they move into adulthood. Then the second thing I want to bring up in these last 45 seconds is to define discipline. I'd like to expand the definition of discipline to move beyond mere punishment. While the primary understanding of the word is to create consequences for disobedience, and I accept and recognize that the pro side of this in defending spanking necessitates discipline being punishment, my stance is that discipline also includes the discipline of study, self-discipline, establishing routine, and communication. This still allows for conflict in the round because we are pitting two understandings and forms of discipline against each other. My opponent is defending spanking as an acceptable form of discipline, and I'm saying that discipline needs to include whatever leads children toward growing into healthy adults.
On that, I think spanking, it works. I'm not saying that it's not wrong, because depending on how you use it, it is wrong. It shouldn't just be, like I said, it shouldn't just be, hey, you get a spanking. Spanking is just a tool in a parent's arsenal to curve their child's behavior in a positive direction that leads them into a happier, more positive life. Could it lead to depression? It didn't for me. I don't know. All the people I know, it has not led them to depression. If anything, for me, let me give you an example. When we had a fireplace in our old house, I would reach out to touch it when I was little. That's just how it was. I'd reach out to touch it, and my dad told me, don't touch that, it's going to hurt you. Could he just realize for myself, hey, that's going to hurt me? Yeah, but that's letting your child burn yourself. You don't want to do that. So what he did was, after a few times of him telling me not to, he spanked me. And I was like, who does this guy think he is? I can do whatever I want. I tried to do it again, another few weeks, spank me again. And then eventually I got the mentality that's like, hey, I shouldn't do that. And I feel like it's for the greater good that a child knows when or when not to do something, because it curves their mentality. It curved my mentality so that I knew, don't put your hand in the fire. And then on top of that, instead of him yelling at me constantly and telling me not to do it, not only did I stop doing it, but instead of making me associate him with negative effect, I associated spankings with negative effects. So I thought, if I do this, am I going to get a spanking rather than, if I do this, my dad's going to yell at me. And that prevents me from getting a negative outlook on my parents and rather a negative outlook on spankings, which makes me think about things before I do them. And it really did help in the long run. And I feel to this day that it helped me. Now, as I got older, of course, they quit spanking me. They just started taking electronics and whatnot. And that works too. It's just a tool in an arsenal that they can use as you progress through your childhood. And I feel like most children already recover for this before they even move out. And most parents, like you said, you appreciated it when you moved out. I'm assuming it's when you moved out. You appreciated it at some point. And I appreciate it now. And I think that that's the case for many people. I'm going to pass the mic.
All right, so the first thing I want to point out is that my opponent seems to be using the phrase parents' arsenal, which to me sounds like weaponry, because we use the term arsenal to describe guns and other forms of weaponry. And for a parent, your child is not your enemy. Your child is someone that you will want to take their hand and lead them along the way and teach them bit by bit in the most loving way possible. And we wouldn't want for children to grow up thinking that their parents are their enemies and their parents are against them. So I'm going to respond to a couple of arguments here. My opponent started his speech by saying spanking works. And I would like to argue against that, saying that researchers say physical punishment actually alters the brain, not only in an untraumatized kind of way, but also in a literally, I have less gray matter in my brain kind of way. Researchers found children who were regularly spanked had less gray matter in certain areas of the prefrontal cortex that have been linked to depression, addiction, and other mental health disorders, the study authors say. They found significant correlations between the amount of gray matter in these brain regions and the children's performance on an IQ test. And that is linked to a meta-analysis focused specifically on spanking, were conducted on a total of 111 unique effect sizes representing 160,000 children from 2016. Just checking my time here. So parenting decreases self-control because it is scientifically linked to how the development in the brain works. The part of our brain that we need to self-control is actually hindered by being spanked. And then the other thing that my opponent brought up was that it doesn't necessarily lead to depression because he, from personal experience, doesn't know anyone who had it, who it leading to depression in. But according to the official statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics in 2012, the use of physical punishment to discipline children has been linked to a range of mental health problems and is strongly opposed by the American Academy of Pediatrics. Study authors conclude pediatricians and other healthcare providers who work with children and parents should be aware of the link between physical punishment and mental disorders. From a public health perspective, study authors conclude reducing physical punishment may help decrease the prevalence of mental disorders in the general population. So here I'm citing 3 studies, one of them being a meta-study, and then a source from the pediatric or American Academy of Pediatrics, all stating very clearly that the link is there. So not only does spanking not work, but it is invariably linked to depression and other mental health disorders. So to respond to my opponent, excuse me, he said,
It's muted. Sorry. What I want to say about that is you said that it was children who were frequently or commonly spanked. And I've already stated before, you shouldn't be commonly spanked. That's not something that parents should do. I was rarely spanked. Rarely. It was only if I did something that my parents had reiterated that was wrong, like the fireplace or pulling my dog's tail. I used to do that too, and I got spanked for that. It's it's only for common or things that have been reiterated to you by your parents. And so when I said arsenal, I didn't mean it like weapons. It's it's not a weapon. It's just something I used to get you to envision how it is. It's not a weapon by any means. It's just something that they use to curve your behavior in a positive direction. And I know it works because it worked on all my friends. That's that's how it is. I'm not going to cite any studies. I just know it does work. When I was spanked, I learned my lesson. That's just how the human mind works. You learn your lesson. And you were saying that you can go into depression and get more anxiety. I have anxiety. It's not from spankings. If anything, it's from the overloads or the not overloads, but tons and tons and tons of schoolwork that are constantly laid onto me. But that's a whole different topic. But spankings, they work. There's nothing that can say that they don't. You can cite studies saying that constant spankings harm them, the mindset, and cause anxiety and depression, and all of those things. But it really doesn't. I've never seen any of it. I'm gonna pass it.
Okay, so in response to your point about how spanking shouldn't be common, it should be very rare. In these studies that I was just citing, what they define spanking as, or harsh corporal punishment was the term that they used for it, was specifically they found no difference between parents who spanked as little as once per month and parents who spanked more often. And they also found no difference between parents who spanked only with a hand or using a spoon or other object to spank their child. And so they found that the correlations were still equally strong across all of those broad bases. So even if you're saying that spanking should be rare, the evidence does not support that. And I would point out to the audience that my opponent has not been using any evidence outside of personal experience. And I would encourage you to seriously look this up, because anxiety was one of the first things that I discovered in my personal life. And I thought for sure, as a teenager, I thought for sure that it could not possibly have been because of anything that happened with my parents or with my family. And I had to research it and reconsider a lot of things before I could think clearly about how much damage had been done from being spanked as a child. And now I oppose it, and now I would never think to spank my children. And I'm glad that I learned that, because when I was a teenager, I really did. And I'm not trying to have any looking down on you because of your age in any way, because that's kind of my point here, is not to look down on anyone because of their age or their experience in any way, because children are people, teenagers are people, and we need to treat all of them, including you, with this base respect. And because I respect you and where you're at, I encourage you to keep looking into this, because the statistics clearly show otherwise. So to go back into the arguments, I just want to explain that you said that spanking is helpful, spanking works, and I just want to say that independence leads to better self-discipline. And this is according to Maria Montessori, leading expert and doctor on developmental psychology. She's in an analysis on her work said, just as a very young child must first learn to stand before she can walk, she must develop an inward order through work before she is able to choose and carry out her own acts. Surprisingly enough, Montessori found that it was through the very liberty inherent in her classrooms that the children were given the means to reveal their inner self-discipline. Independence did not diminish respect for authority, but rather deepened it. And so with that, I would encourage anyone watching to consider that spanking is an old way of doing things. Back to you.
So, I forgot what I was going to say. Dang it. I need a second. When you're being spanked and you get anxiety from it, I feel like when you're in your childhood and you're starting to get anxiety, since it is something that is done out of love, you need to go to your parents with that. You need to say, I'm feeling anxious, I don't really understand why I'm being punished, can you please explain to me why you're doing this? And more times than not, a parent is going to explain to their child that they are doing what they're doing out of love, and that they're doing it to curve your attitude into a positive direction, not to harm you. And if it is something that causes you anxiety or anyone else anxiety, you need to take that to your parents. And if your parents really are truly looking out for you and caring for you and loving you, they'll appreciate that and they'll find other means to discipline their children, like grounding or like you said, letting them be independent. But it depends on each situation. Overall, I I guarantee you overwhelmingly spankings do work. And you said before that you thought they worked on them. And I'd like to ask when it was that you decided that that was the cause of anxiety. If it was, I can't remember exactly what caused it, but I'm pretty sure that's what you said it was. I'm going to pass it.
All right, so to quickly answer your question, when did I know the difference? And the difference was this. I was raised in a very large family and we were very conservative. And as I got older, I was allowed to have some of the responsibility of discipline placed on me because I babysat my younger siblings a lot. And as I was discovering this, I was probably about 19, 20. I was learning a lot about my own anxiety and depression. And I turned to my younger siblings who were standing there. One of them, I think, hadn't been invited to go to the store, and the other one got to go. And so one of the kids was just frustrated, and the other kid was like, haha, you don't get to go. Just a very simple, I think they were 3 and 5, like very little thing. And my immediate response was, this is the kind of thing, like obviously this isn't a big enough deal that my parents would have spanked me for it or anything, but I was testing the question of whether children can be taught and reasoned with, because that was something I had never been taught. And so I turned to the 5-year-old and I said, think about how your brother feels. And the lights went on in his head, and he was suddenly able to, like, I didn't even have to prompt him to apologize or force anything. He was just like, oh, and he immediately stopped. And I realized that even from a super young age, children are able to do that, and I started to practice that more and more. And so to respond to your point about when you're in child, you need to go to your parents about the anxiety, I have 2 responses to this. The first one is that anxiety proves that the child is afraid of their parent. And this means that they are discouraged from going to their parent. And I have another piece of evidence to back this up. Spanking leads to dishonesty, according to a study in child development in 2011. And what they found was they put children in a room and basically they put something behind a curtain and told them not to peek at whatever their prize was. Almost all the kids peeked, but they compared children who were spanked to children who were not spanked. And 90% of the children who had been spanked lied about it, whereas the children who had not were more likely to tell the truth and be honest about the fact that they had peeked at the prize. And this study demonstrates the fact that because spanking leads to fear in children, you find it difficult to go to your parents with that anxiety. Whereas children who do not regularly receive pain from their parents for discipline are less likely to develop those bad habits of lying. My second argument against this is that of love. You said that as long as you're telling your children that you're doing this because you love them, then that makes it better. And I would say that love is no excuse. Lots of people paint love on something and they can use that to describe abusive relationships to the max. Just because you say it's love doesn't mean that it actually is.
And so I'm going to go back to what you said you did when that child didn't get to go to the store. That is exactly right. That is what you're supposed to do. That is normal. What you did is completely 100% correct. Now, if that kid keeps repeating the pattern, that's when I say you step in and warn them, hey, you're going to get spanked if you keep doing this. And that can instill a fear in them. And that's why after you spank a child, this is what my parents did with me too. After I got spanked, they asked me to go sit in my room and think about what I did. I would think about what I did. I'd process it like pulling the dog's tail. You don't pull a dog's tail. I'd process this. My mom would come in. She'd explain to me what I did was wrong, what I was supposed to do that's right, and what to do moving forward. And then vice versa with my dad. He would explain to me why not to do what I do, punishments in the future if I kept doing it. And if you keep that system, I was never afraid because they always helped me understand what I did was completely wrong, pulling a dog's tail, putting your hand in the fireplace, etc. So on that note, I'm going to pass it.
All right. So I'm just going to go ahead and boil down this round because I have about left. You're welcome to talk for 7 minutes at the end here if you want to. If you don't want to, we can go ahead and end it either way. Welcome to QallOut, by the way. I hope you're enjoying it and that you'll stick around. So my very last thing is I just want to go back over everything that we've talked about and kind of crystallize things. My opponent throughout this round has said spanking works, and he's moved back and back on his position. He hasn't defended a lot of exactly what spanking is. He didn't present a case. He hasn't presented any evidence. And so for all of these reasons, I should definitely win the round. But outside of winning the round, because this is a topic that I'm so passionate about, I want to emphasize the fact that there are so many disadvantages to spanking. And so there was only one argument brought up in the last speech, so I'll quickly address that. And that was just that spanking shouldn't be done immediately. It should be something that is a last resort or after a child repeatedly does something. And I would refer back to those studies where I talked about it didn't matter about the timing. It didn't matter about whether the parent was or was not emotional in doing it. It didn't matter what they used. And it didn't matter how often that spanking was. So even cases of minimal spanking will lead to those same disadvantages in later life and in adulthood and in creating a fear relationship between the parent and the child. And then I just want to go over some basic disadvantages here because I have about a minute left. Spanking diffuses comprehension of consent. Nobody can touch your private parts, but your parents can hit you in the butt. Stop, that hurts, gets thrown to the wayside when the parent inflicts unbearable pain. Spankings tell a child that their fear doesn't matter. Spankings tell a child that their pain doesn't matter. Spankings send mixed signals. We've already talked about that with making sure that the child understands exactly why it is that they're doing this. But I think the real heart of the matter is that children do not get to decide whether or not they are being subject to this pain. And we may say that it is because they are being punished, but we would never treat an adult this way. It would be completely out of the question to say that a man should spank his wife for disobeying him, especially because we see women as more human than children. And so the important thing is to recognize that children are people, and if we're going to help them grow into the best people that they possibly can be, referring back to my criterion, having not having to recover from their childhoods, then getting rid of spanking is the very best option.
So real quick, I'm going to point out what she said right there with men beating their wives. That is wrong. His wife is already grown up. She's already been through this. Assuming she has. It's not his right. It's her parents' right. It's their right to curve their attitude into a positive, happier environment. But I'm going to read what I wrote here before the debate. It was a few hours before. My stance is that spanking a child is an appropriate form of discipline. A lot of people, when they think about spankings, they may think about child abuse. This needs to be addressed. Spankings are a form of discipline that are properly administered by a parent or guardian out of love. Child abuse is an adult that is out of control and is venting their emotions by abusing their child, and there is a huge difference there. A parent's job is to teach their children the difference between right and wrong and to try and shape their child's behavior into a positive direction. Spanking is simply a tool that parents use to steer their children away from negative behavior and hopefully shape them into healthy, responsible, productive, and happy adults. And I've told you all my stories about when I was little and I was spanked, and it worked. But it did for me. It did for everyone I know. It did for my parents. It worked in school. When children used to be disciplined by their principals, adults in their school. Most people weren't out of line. Nowadays, if teachers so much as touch a student, they have a lawsuit on their hands and they can go to jail for child abuse. It's wrong. It works. It worked back then. It could work now. And that's all there is to it. You know, from past, you can look into schools, you can ask your parents, you can ask your grandparents what their stance on it is. More likely than not, they're going to say that they're all right with it, unless they just got spanked a lot in school, in which case they're probably going to say they weren't all right with it. But my dad has a story from when he went to school in Tennessee. They had a principal who was a former basketball player and super muscular, big dude. Everyone feared him. It was out of fear that students acted in the right way. Could that have caused anxiety? Yes. Could that have caused other issues? Yes. But it worked, like I've been saying this whole time. When students were disciplined by that principal, which was rarely because they acted right, it it worked. They stayed in line, they followed the rules, end of story. And I'm sure they did for the rest of their lives as much as they possibly could. And if it causes anxiety, they can't just go to their principal or the counselors. I mean, they could go to the counselors, but they're not going to do anything, right? But it worked, so they didn't ever have to. And I get, I guess I'm going to end it there, but that's my point, and that's my point.
I have 12 seconds, so I'm just going to say obedience is not the paramount goal in raising children. The paramount goal is making them into healthy adults.
And my point is that Spanking gets them there, but do you want me to end this? Yeah. Okay.